All right, so we are going into Champagne now, so go ahead, open up that study guide, and we're going to get right into this. So where is Champagne? Champagne, of course, is in France. It's about an hour and a half outside of Paris, about northeast of there. And it's really fun conversation starter with people. Most people are very familiar with it, but I do want to make one quick note for you. And it's not on the study guide because it's not a main focus right now, but it is good to know, is that Champagne does produce some still wines. There's 2 other appellations within the region. So if you want to write those down, that is Coteau Champenoise and Rosé de Riz. So now we can jump right in. As I mentioned, it is northeast of Paris, pretty much directly north of Burgundy. The climate is continental, so it experiences all 4 seasons. And the soils, I don't want to dive too heavy into this because it can be really a lot to take in all at once. Really, just to note, it is chalk and limestone, but if you are a big nerd with this stuff, cannot recommend enough this book, Great Wine Terroirs. And you can just read and read, honestly, for hours about this stuff. You will need to know a little bit more about it as we dive deeper into Champagne at a little bit more advanced level. But for now, it's not super important. What we want to know is, hey, what are those main grape varieties? We have Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Meunier. Little side note, Meunier used to be called Pinot Meunier. There are some people who are still calling it that, but it is... The Pinot has been dropped and it is just Meunier from now on. There are a few hazards. When we have that continental climate, we can have some pretty harsh winters. And so frost is a big problem there, as well as some fungal disease. And you may have seen some photos or videos of like little fires in the winter in some vineyards. That is the smudge pots that they're using, and that's one way that we can combat frost in vineyards. It's also done in Chablis, which is, that northern part of Burgundy that sits right by the southern part of Champagne. And our main regions, we have the Montagne de Reims, Vallée de la Marne, Côte Blanc, and Côte Bar. It's not incredibly important for you to know exactly what everything is, and the Grand Cru sites and the Premier Cru. We'll dive deeper into that in the next level of education, but just make sure you're aware of what these are. And as far as the wine growing goes, as I said, Chardonnay, Meunier, and Pinot Noir are the main varieties. There are a few others. There's also Arbonne, Petit Melier, Pinot Blanc, and Pinot Gris. There is one other that's very new. I believe it was in 2021 it became permitted, and just a tiny little area. There's a very small permission currently to work with Voltiers Blanc. But again, not super important for you to know. I just did want to tell you that in case you come across that information later on. Yes, in about 2021, I want to say June or July 2021, that did change, and there's a very small permission for use of that variety. But a majority, as you can see on that little pie chart, is the Pinot Noir, Meunier, Chardonnay. And then the other, this is rounded up, it's less than 0.5% of the vineyard area is made up of the rest of those varieties. And then as we go down to the traditional method, this is how we make the bubbles. So this is the fun stuff. We create the base wine, that's a regular fermentation, and then assemble the blends, and then it's put into the bottle. So we have this bottle here, we have the base wine, we would have put that into this bottle, put a cap on it, and, well, before, you put the wine in here, and then we put what's called liqueur de tirage, and that is this mixture of wine and yeast and sugar, because as we know, basic fermentation science, sugar and yeast ferments, and, well, we do get a few things out of that, but one of those is CO2 in that reaction. So as you can imagine, we have the wine in here, temporary cap on here, the liqueur de tirage, so we have that fermentation starting, and CO2, but it has nowhere to go because this is totally closed. And that's how we get the bubbles in the wine. And then after that, we have the sur lie aging, and that's the aging on the lees. As you may remember, lees is yeast. So essentially what happens is yeast is used for fermentation, and then it eventually dies and settles down at the bottom of, if you're doing it fermentation in a tank, at the bottom of a tank, or in this case, at the bottom of the bottle. And it releases these really beautiful notes of like floral notes and almonds and brioche and toastiness and a lot of those things that people who are big champagne lovers, they love that lees note. So what happens with that is we have at least 12 months of that sur lie aging, and then what's called remuage. And we call that riddling in English. So pretty much, you may have seen videos of people just turning and turning and turning and turning the bottles like that. So what they're doing is they have that yeast and they're trying to get it down to settle in the neck of the bottle, because with that, they're going to do a disgorgement or a dégorgement. And what happens with that is we freeze the neck of the bottle, and then this little puck of lees expels from the bottle. After that, we do lose a little bit of the wine, so there is a liqueur d'expédition that's added, and with that comes dosage if we want to add it. And what is dosage? That's where we get that sweetness. And the dosage level directly indicates what level of sweetness we have in the finished wine. I know that was a lot, so just really quick recap of that is, okay, how do we make champagne? Base wine, make a blend, throw it in the bottle with a little bit of mixture of wine yeast and sugar, and then that makes a secondary fermentation. Bubbles are trapped, let it age, get all that into the neck of the bottle, freeze it, comes out, top it back up, put the cork in, done. Just to go over a couple terms, you may see bottles that say like it's a Blanc de Blanc or a Blanc de Noir. So what does that mean? Well, a Blanc de Blanc is a white wine that is made from only white grapes. And a Blanc de Noir is a white wine that's made only from black grapes. And again, how we do that? Well, red wines, they get their color from maceration. So how do we use those and not get any color at all? We just press the grapes, remove the skins so that none of that macerates with the must. And that's how we make white wine from black grapes. And yes, champagne can be made with a blend as well of black and white grapes. That's pretty common. And it just won't say either Blanc de Blanc or Blanc de Noir on that bottle. We also, in champagne, there's white and rosé. The rosé is going to be made either by a blend or by the sommelier method, which is that bleeding method. All right, and on to the sweetness designations. It's good to have a decent idea of this, just because you are going to see these on a lot of bottles. Some guests might have questions about it when you're working in retail. Customers may have questions about it. And this sweetness designation is also used in some other sparkling wines. So we have the Bruts first. So that's your dry. Brut Nature has nothing added to it, and it is bone dry. Extra Brut can still have 0, but it can go all the way to 6. And same thing with Brut, it can also have 0 and go all the way up to 12 grams per liter of that residual sugar. So think about that. We do grams per liter, but this is 75% of a liter, it's 750 milliliters. So if it has 12 grams per liter, there's going to be less than 12 grams in that bottle. And then this is where it can get a little confusing, the extra dry. And I will tell you right now, I have not once worked with a wine that was a champagne that said extra dry on the label. You should know it, but you might not end up working with it much. But especially if you are going after some certifications, you may have some of these questions on your exam, so please don't brush over it too much and just make sure you do have a good idea of what this is. So to me, I found the easiest way to think about it is you have from driest to sweetest, Bruts, extra dry, sec. Sec means dry, by the way. So you have extra dry and then dry, demi-sec, which is like a half dry, and then doux, which is sweet. And now I almost want to apologize for having to go over this because it's a lot of information, but there are some label codes. And again, this I feel is almost more so important for those certifications that you may be taking with different organizations. But in day-to-day life of working as a sommelier, I will tell you that this has not been something that I've necessarily needed to know, whether working in retail or restaurants. And even in the highest of the highest end restaurants, I didn't need to know this. But I'm still going to go over it with you and explain everything just so you have a good understanding of it. So the first one on our sheet here is an NM, and a négociant is essentially a merchant. And this one is a producer who purchases grapes. So they buy grapes, they're a merchant who's buying grapes, but then they produce the wine themselves. Next one is an RM, who is a producer who makes champagne with grapes of their own vineyards. So that is a grower-producer. They grow the grapes and they produce the wine. And RC, so this one and CM after are pretty similar. They both involve co-ops. First one, RC, the grower sells their grapes to the co-op, and then the grower, receives that final wine to sell themselves. So they grow, sell the grapes, get the finished wine back, and then they sell the wine. The difference between that and the CM is that the CM, the co-op, is the one selling the wine. So the co-op has members who grow the grapes. Co-op gets that, makes the wine, and then sells the wine. Whereas the RC, grower has the grapes, sells it to the co-op. Co-op makes the wine, but then the grower is selling the finished wine. Next one, SR, is growers who make champagne with their own grapes. So you essentially have a group of different growers, and then they all take that and make champagne. And ND is another négociant, another merchant. So this one is buying finished champagne to market under their own label. So they are not growing and they are not making the wine, but they sell it under their own label. And then an MA. This is a buyer's own brand. So I will say this is kind of like Costco and Kirkland's. That's how I always think of it. Every time I see that, I just think Kirkland's. So I hope that made sense. I know that's a lot to kind of take in, but I will tell you right now, I mean, even on this bottle that I have, great producer, by the way, even on the back of this bottle, they don't have any of those codes. It says estate bottled. By the time it's imported here, their label says estate bottled on the back. Now I do want to move into talking about something that is very important for you to know, and that is all about a tête de cuvée. So cuvée is essentially a bottling by a producer, a certain label by a producer, and tête in French means head, so you can think like head bottling, and it's a champagne house's like best or top bottling. And these tend to undergo extended aging, so the wines will be more expensive because they're aging those longer, they're holding them longer, and they are more complex wines overall. A couple of famous examples, Krug has the Clos de Menil and Clos d'Ambonnet. Bollinger has their Vieillevin Française. Very famous one, Dom Perignon by Moët & Chandon. Perrier-Jouët has the Belle Époque, and that's the one with the flowers on it. And then Cuvée Sir Winston Churchill by Paul Roger. Okay, now something really fun, and I know if you're watching this course, you're probably also very into sustainability. So champagne is kind of intense with some of the goals they've set for themselves, and I want to take a little bit extra time to talk about this with you. I will also put a link in the description of this video to a specific website that will be updated by an organization that is keeping track of all of this, because it's a lot to go through and I won't be able to update these videos all the time. but that will have those updates for you. So this is done by the VDC. They're an official certification of environmental performance for champagne winemakers. And today they have over 60% of the land has environmental certifications, and that's certifications through them, through AB, through other organic biodynamic certifications. And so now they have less than 40% left that have to go through that. And actually one of their goals is by the year 2030 to have the rest of that area certified, because they want 100% of that land to have an environmental certification. It's almost 2025. That is an intense goal to have. They also have a biodiversity footprint commitment, and over the last 15 years, the area has lowered its carbon footprint by 20% per bottle. And now 92% of the industrial waste is treated and recycled. And I will say, years ago, it was lower, and I want to say about 2 years ago when I began putting this course together, they were around 90%, and now they've gone up since then, so that shows that they are very much committed to this. And a couple other goals. They had a goal to have zero herbicide use by 2025, which is only a couple months away from the time I'm filming this. And by 2050, they want to reduce their carbon footprint by 75%. And that's also a pretty intense goal when you think about how much carbon emission it comes from winemaking, and not just the wine growing, the making, the transportation of it. It's massive. So what I'm actually going to do for a moment is I'm going to pull up and just read off of their website, and this is the one that is linked in the video, just to talk about some of their commitments. So they have the biodiversity footprint, and there's a couple interesting things I wanted to read off of this. So they have a preservation plan that is going in and recording a couple things. So they found 55 species of bird recorded in the area, and nearly 600 species of insects and spiders found, and that includes 70 species of predator and parasites of vine pests. I'm going to explain why that's so important, because with these vine pests, we're using different pesticides and synthetic things to try to get rid of them to save the vines. But this biodiversity preservation plan was able to identify 70 different species that are there that are predators of these pests. So that's pretty incredible. They're working with the environment and saying, hey, we want to preserve this because then we won't have to do all these synthetic things, and the wine's going to be better. It's going to cost us less. We won't have to buy all this stuff. And it's better to preserve the land to be able to continue making these amazing wines. So you can go ahead, read through. They have a lot of different things on here. It would take way too long for me to go over this, but I do want to tell you they also have plans to reduce their water footprint, carbon footprint, and even talking about the economy. It's a wonderful place. They are really leading away in environmentalism more than some other places, and I think a lot of people don't know about it because people think, oh, like Jura and Alsace, because they have all these natural wines that people know about, and the Loire Valley is like that too. But really, Champagne has a heavy, heavy focus on this, and it's something that we need to watch out for and really pay attention to, especially regarding climate change, how the wines are going to be changing, and what our producers are doing there. And that's all I have on Champagne. I hope you learned something. Please let me know if you have any questions at all, and I'll see you in the next video.